Hello, I am back. Hope you guys are well. Flew in from Denver to Los Angeles to cover, of course, the trial of the century. That is Danny versus Philip Campos. If you do want to support, only because I paid for dog care and a flight, I do have my Venmo and all that jazz and GoFundMe and all of that if you're interested. Cash App as well. But let's talk about this case. What I'm going to do is as usual, I'm going to give you the crux of the case, but there are 10 pages of juicy quotes. So I'll start off explaining the case and be certainly organized in that regard, and then be a little more crazier, a little more scattershot when I quote word from word. So first, let me give you the crux and tell you what happened in part one. And remember, we're on break. So all of this that I'm talking about has simply happened from the hours of 10 a.m. to the hours of about noon. Only about 2 hours. So there's a lot that happened even within the 2 hours. So it started off with an argument about what type of footage could be used. What type of footage from whose camera? Could they be still? Could they be video? And what Kendrick Moxon tried to do is apparently last night at 9:30 p.m., he sent Dorothy Gibbons White, Danny's attorney, a bevy of screenshots of new evidence. Specifically, he sent 92 extra exhibits when there were previously 50 exhibits on the table. He decided to send an additional 92 exhibits. All of those 92 exhibits are simply still pictures of the video, as if that might frame the situation in a different way or shed some light or shed some truth on Campos's part. I would doubt that's the case, but that is what Kendrick Moxon for Philip Campos. Campos is also there. That is what he's trying to do, to try to go beyond the video that has been initially accepted as evidence and look at alternate sources of the video, alternate ways to present the video as evidence. So Dorothy was essentially overwhelmed by that, Dorothy Gibbons White, and it appears the judge hasn't made an official ruling. We'll find that ruling after the mid-session, but the judge remarked that she wanted the evidence to be narrow, and if the initial video shows everything in question, then the initial video shows everything in question, and you don't need to make these screenshots. There was also a big argument because Kendrick Moxon said that the YouTube itself was inaccessible for a while, that it was presented and then it was taken down. And in the moment that it was posted and after it was taken down, but before the court case, Moxon was unable, he says, to access the video. Therefore, Moxon said he put the video before it got deleted on Vimeo. And that Vimeo, Moxon has tried to remark, is simply a hosting service, a file sharing service, if you will, and that you will get a truthful course of events through the Vimeo video the same as you would through the YouTube video. Now, Dorothy argued very quickly that there's no way to check the verification, the validity of this video to see if it was edited or not, to see if only certain things were taken out of context. So that was a very big back and forth. Can the Vimeo video be used, or will that be out of the question? And simply will there be the YouTube itself? With a disagreement on that, Dorothy Gibbons White and Kendrick Moxon had to essentially confer with each other, and that conference lasted a whopping 30 minutes. And ironically, Moxon was mainly conferring with the assistant attorney, also present, a bald gentleman, and Dorothy remarked to him, he said, well, aren't we supposed to be, this is a conference, so aren't we supposed to be talking? And then Moxon very flippantly, very rudely lifted up his finger and said, hold on. And then continued talking with his alternate attorney. So there was some issue about that. Another thing is a whole situation about the witnesses. What witnesses could could present, what witnesses can't. One argument was about Kelly. So many of you were confused. Kelly was not actually at the incident in question. This whole incident, of course, is based on potentially the ramming of the scooter. Danny and the scooter guy, and of course, if you see the video, Danny seems pretty exonerated, and as if he was assaulted himself, not necessarily the other way around. Where Kelly comes into view is that Kelly saw Philip Campos essentially mime shooting a gun at a bevy of protesters, which would kind of show light and highlight his antagonistic character. Now, this is where I'm going to actually have to remark a disagreement with Danny's counsel, so I want to bring things to you objectively, and I want to highlight, at least in my personal opinion, when I think people are doing something right and when I think people are doing something wrong. Now, usually Moxon is usually the incompetent one, and Dorothy certainly isn't incompetent, but what she's trying to do is it could open up Pandora's box, because what she's trying to say is this is an incident not directly on the day, directly in the footage of the incident that is being debated about in this restraining order, but this incident of the miming of shooting on Philip Campos' part speaks to his character. Well, what else is Moxon trying to do? This may sound familiar. Moxon is trying to bring up the comments of 86 GOP. Specifically, oddly enough, 86 GOP's comments in DOA's chat. Here's the interesting part, which the judge remarked. The judge is aware of all this because guess what? This judge, Judge Scully, is the same judge that has been overseeing DOA's case as well. So she knows all about the DOA situation. But Moxon also wants to essentially tie everybody together and say that this is something thematic, and Moxon, quite egregiously, even called Danny, and I'll get to the specific quotes, but he even called Danny a gang member. And essentially what he's trying to do, we could harken back to the RICO stuff that they're trying to see if that sticks, but he's trying to tie all the protesters together and sort of identify them as a gang. Now, I know, when you look at Danny, the first thing that comes to your mind is Tupac and Biggie reincarnated. So that might be a legitimate way to go. Who knows? But that's the slippery slope that you use. If you allow Kelly to be the witness, if you allow Kelly to say, well, I didn't witness Philip doing anything on that day, but on the separate day, this is what I witnessed Philip doing, then perhaps the 86 GOP comments might end up being perfectly valid, or at least being perfectly valid to be heard in court, because there's going to be argument after argument about each little evidentiary, each little exhibit. So I don't know if that's the smartest way to necessarily go about it. And guys, that's just my opinion. I still think Danny will win this fairly easily. I don't think the judge is buying Moxon's constant objections. And the hilarious part is in the conference, Moxon said that YouTube thing was inaccessible, and Moxon also tried to claim that he couldn't get internet. He said the internet's not accessible, even though ironically I was just on the public provided Wi-Fi inside the courtroom, which had 5 bars. And Dorothy even offered, she said, you can use my phone as a hotspot, use my signal, and she was showing Moxon the actual YouTube video, which I thought was interesting. But you have to be careful. Here's the other thing you have to be careful about, just in terms of objectively analyzing the case. And again, I think Danny has this in the bag, but I want to talk about what was done right and what was done wrong in the past, and what will help his case and what will hurt his case. Danny, he has argued, to defend himself, has used pepper spray, right? We've heard that situation. A lot of people feel it was certainly called for. But if you're a judge, you're like, why is this dude pepper spraying not once but twice? So that might not be the best argument, quite to speak honestly, because Moxon brought up the pepper spray stuff. I think Danny was in the right to pepper spray. I think he was wise to do that. He was cornered. He was being threatened. But there are some who wouldn't necessarily bring pepper spray in the first place. And the moment you bring any sort of it's not even a weapon, but any sort of thing that causes pain or damage to somebody, you're almost asking for trouble, or you're almost asking for your actions to be analyzed too, which Moxon, perhaps with, I hate to say this, again, just in terms of full honesty, guys, Moxon might be able to really take the ball and run with the pepper spray stuff, and that might have a lot more validity than the 86 GOP comments. The fact that Danny pepper sprayed twice, I think will hurt his case. I still think he will win, but it's a little, I want to just present to you the evidence that looks good in Moxon's favor, as well as the evidence that looks good in Dorothy Gibbons White's favor, right? So you have to put everything on the table, and you have to analyze just as if you're, I love politics, as if you're analyzing an election. You kind of have to analyze what's going to help and what's going to hurt. The pepper spray does not help. Kelly opens up a can of worms to make the pepper spray stuff valid. If I were the attorney, I wouldn't have brought up the Kelly stuff, and therefore I would have had a better chance to get the pepper spray stuff thrown out of evidence to be heard in the court case, right? If we're not looking at Kelly and that's not even mentioned, then Dorothy is saying that she's not doing this, but Dorothy could say that she's only focusing on the incident in question and only focusing on evidence on that specific day, of which the judge says that's what she wants. So she really admonished, ironically, both Dorothy and both Kendrick on being way too broad and way too outside the line in terms of that specific day with the evidence that they want to present. So it's an interesting scene in that regard. I'll talk about this and quote more thoroughly. But the other thing, of course, the other thing that Moxon keeps trying to beat a dead horse with, which is completely irrelevant, which is certainly going to hurt him, is that 86 GOP is paying for Danny's attorney fees. Never heard that one before, right? So that is a big argument that Moxon is trying to use, that 86 GOP paid for the attorney fees. Now, that was quickly retorted because, of course, Danny used the funds directly from 86 GOP directly paid the previous attorney that Danny had, that Danny was not satisfied with, and he raised the GoFundMe due to your help, due to the help of many others, where he was able to get the attorney that he needed. So that argument seems very silly, and you can see that in spite of me objectively analyzing everything, Moxon still doesn't have a case, because he's using the same argument now in two cases. Not only that, two cases? Yeah, at least in two cases. He's using the same argument in two cases. Not only that, the judge is overlooking both cases. So the judge is going to kind of think this whole thing is kind of dumb, and you're grasping at straws, and you're recycling the same BS that you've been trying to utilize before. I don't think that's necessarily an effective tactic, if you ask me. But I do think this is a little less of a slam dunk than the last case was, for the reasons that I gave. Let's talk about the specific quotes just so you can hear exactly what they said back and forth to each other now that I gave you the crux. And remember, guys, this is part one, so I'll have a part two probably around 5 or 6 West Coast time. I'm just checking the time so I don't miss the court case. I have an issue with it, and this is the beginning. We're talking about the exhibits, right? That Kendrick Moxon kept trying to introduce these new exhibits literally yesterday at 10 p.m. She says, I have an issue with Dorothy Gibbons White says, and forgive me if I use the shorthands of names. I'm trying to write things down. So in court, they'll refer to 86 GOP as Mr. Comer, but I wrote it as 86. So I could write in time. So I'll be saying 86 GOP. That's not what they said. I'll be saying Dorothy. Moxon said Miss Gibbons White. I'll be saying Danny. Moxon in the court will be referring to his last name. So I'm just saying this in advance, guys. Me referring to their names is just me reading in the most fluid way that I can and writing the name down in a way that is the easiest to write shorthand, quite frankly. So Dorothy says, I have an issue with the 91 exhibits that were filed. They're less than truthful. I got them at 11 p.m. I was wrong, 11 p.m. These new exhibits, there were 55 of them, of which I made objections. Kendrick Moxon said they were made because of improper labeling. But all of these are just random photos. Moxon responds, all exhibits I sent are part of a rolling set of documents. I made these exhibits still, and I put labels on them as well. So Moxon says, the reason I'm doing this is, the reason I want to have these stills, because the judge asked him that. He says, but the first moments are confusing. There were 5 people involved. Dorothy claims Phil was the aggressor. The stills might show a different story. And the judge asks, why was this filed last night? Moxon says, this is in response for her trial brief. Some of this can be used in a rebuttal. Dorothy said, and with these Vimeo clips that Moxon is trying to present, all the videos have been manipulated. This is Dorothy Gibbons-White speaking. All the Vimeo videos have been manipulated and put on video. They're played back at a different speed. This makes Danny seem more aggressive. I received this way too late if I'm expected to trust him, and that they're the same videos I've received that match the labeling. He could have asked me, but I suspect he manipulated it. The judge says that there's a debate on, I'm not interested in hearing a debate on who's ethical in hearing personal attacks, but I'll go off of the September 18th exhibit list, meaning the judge will not, she probably won't grant the September 30, the exhibit list submitted yesterday, only the one that was submitted previously on September 18th. Because you need an opportunity to examine it. You shouldn't be expected to take the other side's word for it. This is the judge talking. You can pause the video over separate still shots. And then they give a time estimate for people on the stand. Miss Catane, I don't know who Miss Catane is. There's somebody named Miss Catane who's going to be a witness, and she should be there for an hour. He expects Danny Campos to testify for 3 hours, 1 hour for, 2 hours for Danny, and 2 hours for Liam. And Moxon says about the Vimeo stuff, Dorothy objected to the Vimeo. It's a file sharing site. Her videos were downloaded from YouTube, and now they're not accessible. They were taken down. This is just a source to make the video accessible. And the judge says in response, I don't think it matters where they're located on the net. The Vimeo clips were from exhibits that he didn't object to. So he's saying you could have objected to something, Moxon. Sorry for the pause, because I'm just trying to read what's relevant and what's not. Page 4 here. Cool. So then they have the conference. They start meeting. And the judge, they convene. And the judge says, usually at the start of a restraining order court hearing, we give a rundown of petitioning on parts of civil harassment, which is defined by violence. I've not issued a ruling as to whether or not the exhibits has been heard. So she hasn't definitively said anything necessarily. And Dorothy says, the photos are labeled. What you have now are my evidentiary objections. And now the judge has officially ruled, as I write, finally, the exhibit list will not be granted. Sorry, guys. Oh, here's another thing that's interesting. Kendrick Moxon wants to use footage that Aja filmed. So Aja's name has suddenly come up in this court case, which is very interesting. Dorothy Gibbons-White says, this Vimeo video was filmed by Aja. Why would a video filmed by Aja be relevant? How could we authenticate this video? I don't even know who Aja is. It shows some aspects of the evening, but it doesn't show anything honestly or objectively. The judge says, if Aja isn't a witness, then it's not necessarily relevant. And Dorothy says, I use witnesses to authenticate the exhibits 35 to 41. We've authenticated that through witnesses, and that has been granted by the court to be in evidence. Sorry I'm taking so many pauses, guys, as I said I would. But I want to read you what's juicy and less what's not. Because there's some really interesting stuff. I so apologize. But at least it got the crux in the beginning, as I warned you about. Okay, so then there's a back and forth about what dates from what videos that could be shown. May 9th, I believe, was the main video in question. Other dates are trying to be presented. So the judge says, so Moxon says we need to show these screenshots that are of the party. And we need to show these screenshots of a separate video of Scott Hotchester, DOA, because his actions concern my client. Leah recorded the incident from behind. The video is in February. And it shows that Danny had interactions with Phil before. One video has Danny threatening somebody with pepper spray. This is Moxon speaking. See, I find Campos to be a reasonable person, and he experienced intense stress after hearing of Danny's actions with the pepper spray. Remember, the pepper spray didn't have anything to do with Campo, but he's using that as an argument. After seeing the pepper spray video, Campo went to file the restraining order to protect him. This is separate with Scott, and we have someone in Scott's chat, 86 GOP, threatening to burn down the church. The videos assist in testimony so court can understand what happened. Danny and 3 friends approached Campos with video cameras, which clearly show that Danny is the aggressor. We need to show the entire scene in its full context. And the judge says, in terms of bringing up Mr. Hotchester, other ROs against Mr. Hotchester have been tried in court. And that evidence should remain in Scott's specific case. So saying, yeah, I know about that whole thing, and it's not relevant to this specific court case. And then there's this big argument. There's this big argument, as I mentioned before. I've mentioned all this before, but now you're getting the exact back and forth quotes about the payment of 86 GOP, and Ms. Gibbons-White took some offense to this situation. Ms. Gibbons-White says, Kendrick Moxon wants to talk to 86 GOP and claim the 86 GOP has directly paid me. He is not my client, and he is not financially responsible for anything in this court situation. And then this is where he calls, so they have some back and forth about that. And then Kendrick Moxon tries to make sure a video from La Poubelle is heard. There's another incident outside of La Poubelle. And this is where he calls Danny a gang member. See, the video at La Poubelle, it shows incidents of violence from Danny. And then we find out the person doing this is essentially a gang member. That's what he calls Danny. Moxon says Comer never confirmed he was paying Danny, even after Comer's message threatening to murder me even confirmed. Comer even confirmed he was paying Danny. And this happened even after Comer's messages, 86 GOP, threatening to murder me and burn my client's church down, meaning threatening to burn the Church of Scientology down. Dorothy gets very passionate about this, and this I wrote more fluidly. She says, Dorothy Gibbons-White says, I quote, I have not received any indirect funding from Mr. Comer. 217 people donated to my client. Prior to me, someone else paid for someone else who represented my client for one hearing. Records of these funds are on the GoFundMe. You can look at every single donation. I don't cut corners. I don't do unethical things. I don't get involved with people saying that they want to burn down churches and kill somebody. I take this accusation very seriously and find that he's trying to create a cloud over me and my integrity, as well as my representation. When Danny saw that people in Scientology were being abused, he felt bad for these desperate people. So bad that he spent the majority of his day protesting Scientology and going across the country to do so. And he protested a la poubelle because they have consistently been a supporter of a celebrity who is now a convicted rapist, and as well as a Scientologist. The judge wants to get everything back. There's a lot of back and forth, and she said, let's focus on the evidentiary objections to the specific February video. The court's intention is to focus narrowly to see if the harassment code has been met. So the judge is kind of like almost rolling her eyes at both of them for a lot of the case, quite frankly. But more at Moxon. No videos not on May 9th or March 9th. No other videos that are not on May 9th or March 9th. Those were the two videos that have been agreed to be looked upon. Have any relevance. The problem is, again, if she's talking about Kelly's interaction with Philip Campos, that statement has less water. I've looked at these videos. Danny was acting in self-defense. Judge says either the court hears them or excludes them. Moxon says Dorothy doesn't understand 86 GOP's relevance. It shows Danny received threats and he paid fees after 86 GOP threatened my client's church and his attorney's life, beat me. It shows why Phillips filed the case. So Moxon says, I'm not saying she's paid by 86 GOP. I'm just saying his involvement after he made threats is the crux of the problem. I never said, and this is a direct quote from Moxon, I never said Gibbons White received money on February 12th. It's the same locale. February 12th is the La Poubelle video. It is in the same locale. A neighbor approaches Danny. Danny said, get away or I'll spray you. And then Dorothy Gibbons White interrupts and says, none of this is in relation to the petitioner, and the judge agrees. Then we have the Moxon objecting to Kelly. And they talk about the Kelly case. And Dorothy says the reason this is relevant is because Kelly saw in August from Campos antagonistic behavior. And Campos minds a shooting with his hand. It shows an antagonistic outlook of protesters in general, not just Danny. Exhibit 3 on March 9 occurred after the scooter incident. Police rolled up. Campos called the police and said that Danny tried to rob him, and he got put in jail for a multitude of days. And that's where we leave off. I apologize for being so slow and scattershot and disorganized with the quotes, but there's no way to be organized with 10 pages, especially if I'm trying to get this out in the middle of the break. But hopefully you found part 1 nice and fluid, and again, if you want to show your support, please do, but you will get part 2. Tomorrow we have Danny, the next day we have Danny, and of course, little ass bitch ZDT. So stay tuned. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.